Kwame Mensah was more than just a coach. He was a visionary, a man whose name commanded respect both on and off the basketball court. Born and raised in Accra, Ghana, he had been a promising player in his youth, a shooting guard with a natural talent for the game. His dreams of going professional were shattered by a career-ending knee injury, but instead of stepping away from the sport, Kwame found his true calling in coaching. His journey began in Ghana, where he worked his way up the coaching ranks, earning a reputation for his strategic mind, relentless discipline, and ability to transform raw talent into greatness. He was tough but fair, pushing his players beyond their limits and demanding perfection in every aspect of the game. 5 years ago, his skills caught the attention of Academy, an elite private school in Lagos, Nigeria. The school's basketball team, the Falcon Warriors, had been struggling, failing to make an impact on the national scene. In desperate need of a turnaround, the school offered Kwame a lucrative contract, promising him full control over the team's development. It didn't take long for him to work his magic. Under his leadership, the Falcon Warriors became a dominant force, winning multiple state and national championships. His ability to mold young players into stars made him a local celebrity in Lagos sports community. Parents wanted their sons to play under him, and young athletes saw him as a mentor, a father figure, and a pathway to success. But while his professional career soared, Kwame harbored a darker side, one that threatened to destroy everything he had built. At 42, Kwame seemed to have it all. He was wealthy, successful, and admired. His personal life appeared just as stable. He was married to Abina Mensah, a respected university lecturer, and together they had 2 teenage children. To the outside world, they were the perfect family. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Kwame was a man of many appetites, and faithfulness had never been his strong suit. His status as a coach gave him access to young, impressionable women, and his charm made it easy to lure them in. Though he was careful to keep his affairs discreet, those close to him, assistant coaches, players, and even some of the school staff knew the rumors. There had been whispers about late-night meetings with female students, secret rendezvous with cheerleaders, and favors exchanged for special treatment. But because of his influence and success, no one dared to confront him. His victories shielded him from scrutiny. Until now, because this time, Kwame's hunger for forbidden pleasure would lead him into a trap he couldn't escape. One evening, after an intense practice session, Kwame stood on the sidelines, watching his players leave the court. As he wiped sweat from his brow, his eyes drifted toward the cheerleading squad. That's when he saw her, Amara Okoye. She wasn't like the other cheerleaders. There was something about her, something dangerous. At 18 years old, Amara Okoye was no ordinary high school girl. While other students worried about exams and social media trends, Amara had bigger dreams. She wanted to be a professional dancer, and everything she did, every move, every step, was carefully calculated to get her closer to that goal. She was the kind of girl who commanded attention without trying. With deep brown skin, hazel eyes, and long, flowing braids, she had an aura that made her unforgettable. But beyond her looks, Amara was smart, cunning, and dangerously confident. She had noticed Coach Kwame Mensah long before he had noticed her. She had watched how he carried himself, powerful, respected, untouchable. She had seen the way other girls whispered about him, how women outside the school longed for his attention. Amara wasn't naive. She knew what people said about him, the rumors about his secret affairs, his preference for younger women. Some girls feared him, others fantasized about him. But Amara? She saw an opportunity. Amara had always been ambitious, and she knew that sometimes getting what you want requires boldness. So one evening after practice, when most of the gym had emptied out, she made her move. She walked up to him, her confidence unshaken. "Coach, can I talk to you for a second?" Kwame, who had been gathering his things, glanced at her. "What is it?" he asked, his voice neutral but firm. She smiled, a smile that was both innocent and knowing. I need help with my flexibility, for dancing. I was wondering if you could show me some stretching techniques. For a brief moment, Kwame hesitated. He wasn't stupid. He knew what this was. And yet, he found himself saying, "All right, tomorrow after practice." Their private sessions started the next evening. It was innocent at first. Kwame helped her with stretches, correcting her posture, adjusting her stance. But there was something electric between them, a tension that grew stronger with each passing day. It was the way Amara held his gaze when he touched her, the way she leaned in just a little too close, the way she smiled knowingly when their hands brushed. She was playing a dangerous game and Kwame was taking the bait. One evening, after an especially close encounter, Kwame pulled back suddenly. He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "This needs to stop," he muttered. "This isn't right." But Amara only smirked, stepping closer. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice laced with temptation. And in that moment Kwame knew he was doomed. He had broken rules before. But this was different. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the beginning of his downfall. For weeks, Kwame Mensah convinced himself that nothing was happening between him and Amara Okoye, that their late-night stretching sessions, their lingering glances, the way his pulse quickened whenever she touched him, were all just misunderstandings, coincidences, harmless interactions. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was losing control. The first time it happened, it was after a late practice session. Most of the gym lights were turned off, and the school grounds had grown eerily quiet. Kwame had stayed back, going over game strategies in his office, when a soft knock at the door interrupted him. It was Amara. She stepped inside, her usual confidence intact. She wore her cheerleading uniform, but her hair was loose, cascading down her back. The way she looked at him sent a shiver down his spine. "I didn't think you'd still be here," she said, closing the door behind her. Kwame swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here, Amara. It's late." She took a step closer, her hazel eyes locked onto his. "I wanted to see you." A heavy silence filled the room. He should have stopped this. He should have told her to leave. He should have reminded himself that he had a wife, children, a reputation to protect. But when Amara leaned in and pressed her lips against his, he didn't pull away. And just like that, a line had been crossed. After that night, there was no turning back. Their relationship escalated at a frightening speed. They started meeting in secret, finding quiet corners of the school, sneaking off to hotels when they had the chance. Every stolen moment was filled with passion, desire, and the thrill of breaking the rules. Kwame was obsessed. Amara knew how to keep him hooked. She would send him messages late at night, teasing him with promises of what was to come. She played the role of the innocent schoolgirl in public, but behind closed doors, she was something else entirely, seductive, fearless, and in complete control. For the first time in his life, Kwame felt powerless. He had been with other women before, but none had consumed him the way Amara did. He was distracted during practice, making careless mistakes. His assistants began to notice. Even his players sensed that something was off. And at home, Abina Mensah, his wife, was growing suspicious. Abina had been married to Kwame for 15 years. She knew her husband's patterns, his habits, his weaknesses. She had long suspected that he had a wandering eye, but she had always looked the other way. This time, though, something felt different. Kwame was more distant than ever, coming home later than usual, barely speaking to her or the kids. He was always checking his phone, disappearing into the bathroom for long periods. One night, she decided to follow him. She watched as he left the house, claiming he had a late-night meeting with the school's athletic director. But instead of heading to the school, he drove to a small, hidden motel on the outskirts of Lagos. And he wasn't alone. Abina's heart shattered as she watched from the shadows. She didn't need to see their faces to know. She knew. And at that moment, something inside her broke. As the affair intensified, so did the risks. Kwame and Amara became reckless, sneaking into the gym late at night, exchanging intimate messages on school property. They thought no one was watching, but someone was. A jealous classmate had seen them sneaking off together. A student with a grudge against Amara, one who had secretly admired Kwame from a distance, and she was ready to expose them. What began as a forbidden romance was now spiraling out of control, and soon it would turn deadly. Secrets never stay hidden for long, where gossip spread faster than wildfire. At first, Kwame and Amara believed they were untouchable. They convinced themselves that no one knew, that their stolen moments in dimly lit gym corners and hotel rooms were their own little secret. But they were wrong. It started with whispers, low murmurs among students, side glances from teachers, and knowing smirks from Amara's fellow cheerleaders. A few players on the Falcon Warriors basketball team noticed the way Coach Mensa's eyes lingered a little too long on Amara, the way his hands would occasionally brush against hers, how she was always the last one to leave practice, how she'd sometimes disappear into his office for long periods. Then there were the messages. Amara, confident in her ability to keep Kwame under her spell, had gotten careless. She had saved intimate messages and photos on her phone, completely unaware that someone was watching her every move. That someone was Chinyu Ibekwe. Chinyu had always been jealous of Amara. They had grown up together, once close friends, but as they got older, competition had turned them into bitter enemies. Chinyu had tried outshining Amara in the cheer squad but always fell short. She had crushed on Coach Mensa from afar, fantasizing about being the one he noticed. But he never did. Then one afternoon, Chinyu saw something she wasn't supposed to see. While borrowing Amara's phone to check a class schedule, a suspicious notification popped up. A message from Coach K. Redheart. Chinyu's heart stopped, curious and burning with jealousy. She dug deeper, scrolling through messages filled with explicit words, intimate promises, and hotel bookings. And in that moment, Chinyu knew she had the power to destroy them both. At first, she considered blackmailing Amara, threatening to expose her unless she quit the cheer squad. But then she realized something far more satisfying, ruining Amara's reputation publicly. So one Friday afternoon, Chinyu made her move. She created an anonymous email account and sent a bombshell message to the school administration, attaching screenshots of the texts, voice messages, and even a blurry hotel receipt that bore Kwame's name. Then, she forwarded the same evidence to some of the most notorious gossip blogs in Lagos. By Monday morning, the entire school was in chaos. Kwame walked into school that morning, clueless about the storm that was about to hit him. It wasn't until he noticed students staring at him, whispering behind his back, and the way other staff members avoided his gaze, that he knew something was wrong. Then his phone rang. It was the principal, Mr. Jide Adeniran. Coach Mensa, report to my office. Now. Kwame's stomach dropped. He barely made it halfway to the principal's office before security guards intercepted him, leading him down a different corridor. By the time he stepped inside, he was met with cold glares from the school board members, the principal, and, most devastatingly, his wife, Abina Mensa. She sat in the corner, her arms crossed, her eyes burning with rage and humiliation. And then the principal slid a printed document across the desk. Explain this. Kwame's hands trembled as he picked up the papers, his face draining of color. It was the screenshots of his texts with Amara. The evidence was undeniable. He had been caught. On the other side of the school, Amara was facing her own nightmare. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her social media flooded with messages, some calling her a homewrecker, others sending cruel insults. Her fellow cheerleaders turned against her. Her so-called friends whispered behind her back. Teachers looked at her with disgust, and students either laughed or judged her. And worst of all, her parents had been called in. As she sat in the school counselor's office, her mother sobbed in disappointment, while her father sat silently, his fists clenched, his face stone cold. Amara knew her life was over. But what she didn't know was that this scandal was only the beginning of a far bloodier tragedy. After the scandal broke, Kwame Mensah's life fell apart overnight. He was immediately suspended from his position pending an official investigation. The school board held an emergency meeting, and given the overwhelming evidence, it was only a matter of time before he was permanently dismissed. But that was the least of his problems. His wife, Abina, had left him, taking their children and moving in with her sister. She refused to answer his calls or texts, and when she did respond, it was through her lawyer, demanding a divorce. Kwame's face was plastered all over the news. The once respected basketball coach, known for molding young athletes, was now being called a predator, a disgrace, and a homewrecker. He couldn't leave his house without being harassed by reporters, and social media was relentless. Parents who once admired him were now calling for his arrest. Kwame was spiraling fast, and in the midst of his downfall, his mind turned to the one person he blamed the most, Amara Okoye. If Kwame thought he had it bad, Amara's world had turned into a living hell. She had been expelled from school, her dreams of a college cheerleading scholarship shattered. The scandal had destroyed her reputation, and her parents were furious. Her father, Chief Emeka Okoye, was a wealthy businessman with deep ties in Lagos. He had spent his life building his family's name, and now his daughter had tarnished it beyond repair. At home, Amara was essentially a prisoner. Her parents had taken away her phone, cut off her social life, and forbade her from leaving the house. But none of that compared to the threats she was receiving, leaking her personal information online. Strangers sent her death threats, some even going as far as promising to teach her a lesson. She thought it couldn't get worse, but it did, because someone was watching her. It was a stormy night in Lagos, the sky flashing with lightning as rain poured heavily on the city. Amara sat in her bedroom, scrolling through an old phone she had secretly kept, reading article after article about the scandal. Then, a notification popped up. A text from an unknown number. "You ruined my life. Now it's time for me to ruin yours." Her heart stopped. She knew who it was. Kwame. Panicked, she rushed to lock her bedroom door. Her parents were asleep down the hall, but she didn't want to wake them. She told herself he was just trying to scare her, that he wouldn't actually do anything. Then the power went out. The entire house was swallowed in darkness. Amara's breathing became shallow. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. And then she heard it. A soft creak from the hallway. Someone was inside the house. Amara barely had time to react before her bedroom door burst open. Kwame stood there, dripping wet, his eyes wild with rage. She screamed, scrambling backward, but he lunged at her, pinning her down. His hands wrapped around her throat, squeezing as he whispered, "You took everything from me." Amara kicked and clawed, gasping for air, but Kwame was too strong. The last thing she saw was his furious, tear-streaked face. Then, everything went black. The next morning, Amara's lifeless body was found sprawled on her bedroom floor. Her throat bruised, her face frozen in terror. When the police arrived, they discovered bloody footprints leading out of the house. By midday, the manhunt for Kwame Mensah had begun, and within hours they found him. Kwame was discovered hiding in an abandoned warehouse, his clothes still stained with blood. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't even speak. At trial, he showed no remorse, staring blankly ahead as the judge sentenced him to death by hanging. As the courtroom buzzed with whispers, Amara's father stood up, his voice shaking with rage. "You thought you could take my daughter and get away with it? Now you will pay." Kwame closed his eyes, accepting his fate. The scandal that had rocked Lagos' elite sports community had ended in a gruesome tragedy. But in the end, no one truly won. Because where there was once talent, ambition, and promise, All that remained was death, disgrace, and the echoes of a forbidden affair gone horribly wrong. Lagos had seen many scandals, but few had shaken the city like the tragic downfall of Kwame Mensah and Amara Okoye. For weeks, their names dominated headlines, sparking endless debates on power, abuse, and forbidden love. Some blamed Kwame, calling him a predator who manipulated a young girl. Others blamed Amara, painting her as a reckless temptress who ruined a man's life. But in the end, both were victims of their own choices. Amara was buried in an elaborate funeral, attended by hundreds of mourners. But behind the flowing tears and solemn hymns, whispers spread. She brought shame to her family. If only she had stayed away from him. This was never supposed to happen. Her parents, Chief Emeka and Madam Ifeoma Okoye, never recovered. Her father, once a respected businessman, withdrew from society. He never spoke of Amara again. Her mother, overwhelmed by guilt and grief, spent her days in solitude, visiting Amara's grave every week, leaving behind fresh roses and unanswered prayers. In prison, Kwame awaited his execution. His once powerful frame had withered, his sharp gaze now empty. He refused visitors, including his wife, Abina, who had filed for divorce the moment he was arrested. His children, once his pride and joy, were now strangers to him. And on the day of his execution, as the noose was placed around his neck, he whispered his final words. "I should have walked away, but it was too late." The tragic affair between a coach and his cheerleader became a legend in Lagos. Parents warned their daughters about falling for older men in power. Coaches were watched more closely than ever before. But no one could forget. Because in the end, this was not just a story about love and betrayal. It was a lesson that some forbidden desires come at a deadly price.